All right, let's jump right in. Welcome back, focus learners, to another explainer. Look, whether you're building a new privacy fence, putting up a sturdy mailbox, or constructing one of those beautiful backyard pergolas, getting your post holes right, it is absolutely the foundation of a successful project. I mean, the whole shebang rides on that base. So today, we're taking the guesswork completely out of the ground. We're going to give you the ultimate blueprint for calculating exactly how much concrete you really need for those post holes.
Before we break ground, let's take a quick look at today's blueprint. We'll start with the concrete guessing game, move on to sizing up your hole, tackle the concrete math, check out a bag count cheat sheet, and finally, wrap up with some pro tips for longevity.
So step 1, the concrete guessing game.
Now, this is a universal hurdle. It doesn't matter if you're a weekend DIY warrior or a junior contractor. Everybody faces this right out of the gate. You basically have two classic DIY nightmares when it comes to buying concrete. On one hand, you guess too low. You buy way too little, and what happens? Bam! You're stuck making this incredibly frustrating mid-project run back to the hardware store when you should really just be building. On the other hand, you guess too high and buy way too much. Now you're just wasting your hard-earned cash and literally hauling these incredibly heavy bags of dead weight around your yard for absolutely zero reason. So our goal today, we're going to hit that sweet spot right in the middle.
All right, moving on to step 2, sizing up your hole.
Because, before you can even think about calculating concrete volume, we actually need to understand exactly how big the hole itself needs to be. This is absolutely crucial for stability. We use a standard rule of thumb here, sometimes called the rule of 3. Basically, your hole's diameter needs to be exactly 3 times the width of your post. So, let's say you're using a standard 4x4 post, which, by the way, actually measures 3.5 by 3.5 inches. You're going to need a hole that's roughly 10 to 12 inches in diameter. Next up is the depth. Your post hole should be dug to a depth that's about 1/3 to 1/2 of the above-ground height of the post. So, if you're putting up a 6-foot fence, which is 72 inches above ground, that hole needs to be at least 24 inches deep. Pretty straightforward, right?
Well, there's a little bit of a catch, and it's called the frost line. Always check your local building codes for this one. In colder climates, groundwater freezes at a certain depth under the surface, which is often 36 to 48 inches down. You absolutely have to dig your hole below this frost line. If you don't, when winter hits, that freezing ground will expand and literally push your post right up out of the earth. It's a hugely destructive process called frost heave, and trust me, it will completely wreck your fence.
Okay, section 3, the concrete math. Now consider this your fair warning. This is the tedious way to do things. That formula might look like a giant math puzzle at first glance, but structurally it actually makes perfect sense. If you were to calculate the volume by hand, you're essentially just taking the volume of a cylinder, which is your hole, and subtracting the volume of a rectangular prism, which is the buried part of your wooden post. It's pi times the radius squared times the depth, minus the width, length, and depth of the wood. But honestly, doing this math by hand for dozens of fence posts, and then trying to convert cubic inches into cubic feet or yards just to figure out how many bags to buy? Yeah, no way. It is incredibly tedious.
So, let's relieve some of that mathematical tension, shall we? The absolute easiest and most practical approach, instead of sitting there crunching numbers on a notepad, is just to use a dedicated online tool. There are free post-hole concrete calculators all over the internet. You just pop in your post dimensions, the hole size, and the total number of posts you're setting. Boom! The tool instantly spits out the exact bag count you need to pick up from the store. A real game changer.
Which brings us to section 4, the bag count cheat sheet.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that it's the ultimate shortcut for standard 4x4 posts set in a 10-inch diameter hole. I highly recommend you literally pause this explainer right now and just take a screenshot of this cheat sheet. It is that useful. If you have a standard 24-inch hole depth, you're going to need 3 50-pound bags, 2.5 60-pound bags, or 2 80-pound bags. It perfectly maps out your exact needs all the way down to a 48-inch frost line depth.
And as you'll see, there's a clear inverse relationship at play here for that standard 24-inch hole. By opting to buy the heavier 80-pound bags, you are actually reducing the total number of bags you have to handle and rip open for every single hole. You're dropping from 3 individual 50-pound bags down to just 2 80-pound bags. It saves a lot of hassle.
But hey, regardless of what bag size you actually end up choosing, always keep the number 10 in the back of your mind. You should always add a 10% waste factor to your final concrete order. The reality of any backyard project is that you're going to hit roots, find weird rocks, dig unevenly, or just accidentally spill some dry mix. That 10% buffer ensures you aren't making that dreaded mid-project store run we talked about earlier. Better safe than sorry for sure. All right, let's wrap this up with section 5, pro tips for longevity.
These next few points are absolute gold nuggets to make sure your hard work actually lasts a lifetime. The absolute crucial point for making a wood post last is managing water. You really want to add 3 to 4 inches of crushed gravel at the very bottom of your post hole before you ever add concrete or drop the post in. This porous layer allows rainwater and groundwater to drain safely away from the bottom of the wood, which drastically reduces the risk of the post rotting out over time. Just remember, actually, this is super important, you have to dig your hole 4 inches deeper than your calculated post depth to actually fit this gravel base in there.
Also, keep in mind that our rule of 3 scales up. So if you're upgrading from a standard 4x4 to a massive 6x6 post, which actually measures 5.5 by 5.5 inches, you're going to need a hole that is at least 16 to 18 inches in diameter. Because that hole is so much wider, a 6x6 post is going to require a significantly larger volume of concrete than your standard 4x4 just to hit that required stability.
Which brings us to our final piece of advice, and it's all about using fast-setting concrete. You know, the stuff often sold in the red bags. The beautiful thing about this material is its total simplicity. It completely eliminates the exhausting process of mixing heavy, wet concrete in a wheelbarrow. You just brace your post, pour the dry mix directly into the hole, and then dump water right on top of it. It sets up in just 20 to 40 minutes. It allows you to move down your fence line incredibly fast.
So that brings us to the end of our blueprint. Remember, your fence, your pergola, your mailbox, they are really only as strong as their foundation. By understanding the rule of 3, making sure you dig below that frost line, and using the right bag calculators, you are setting yourself up for absolute success. So armed with this math, your fence is only as strong as its foundation. Will your next post stand the test of time or the test of frost? Thanks for hanging out with me for this Explainer Focused Learners. Now get out there and build something solid.